number is it? It's, 14. So we've already got the 1 year post-construction, so if they didn't,
After the first year.
correct. So if they open in April, by April of the following year, post-construction, they have to provide a snow. So you have basically, from the time they submit to that study, you know, in that 1 year window, if it's not compliant then,
You make another study.
well, if it's not compliant then, you're able to enforce them making corrections within the time that's prescribed within the ordinance, and then they would have to remediate it. But at the same time, you do have the DNR and others looking over this project through the permitting process, and they're gonna pretty much, you know, enforce it. Where it gets squirrely during the course of construction is when they find something that they can't get around, right? And the permitting authority says, oh, you can reroute it here, and then the next thing you know, it was a non-participating farm, and now they've got it. Those are usually the kind of things that come up, but that 1 year, they have the right, they have to remedy it if we find it in the first year.
I guess my opinion is, I think we should leave a 5-year post in there myself. That's my opinion.
This is a backup.
Just in case something changes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, nobody looks at it again.
Right.
Because otherwise, I think, Tammy, we'd have to go back and we'd have to, like, let's say you wanted the 5 years, because then we changed our mind. And you have to go back there and you gotta rewrite it in. I think goes along what you're saying, you don't wanna rewrite stuff.
I mean, we don't wanna babysit them, but it's like Rick said, something may happen along the
Yeah.
way and like that.
But if we don't have that provision of 5 years in there, then, we'd have to come up with a new exclusion on that.
So it does say a copy of the study shall be provided to the township board,
Correct.
but yet we have an obligation with the setbacks that we had in the prior comments regarding wildlife studies and aviation studies.
It's pre-construction, though, this is post-construction.
I know, but that's what you got the 1 year for. Now you're asking 5 years later. Well, that tower didn't just jump 20 feet 5 years after it was done.
But this is the wildlife study.
I know, but if they met the conditions of the wildlife study at the
Right.
time construction's done, do we need a 5 year?
I feel we do.
All this is a requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have to.
You're fine, it's just a babysitting
Right.
item, I think we need to have a checklist for the
Right.
township.
What do you think?
I'm fine with it. We'll leave it in there.
You saying leave it?
Yeah. Leave it.
So, question for this one, I don't think we expressly, this is not one that we wanna pick the professional for, correct? We just want this to be completely on them and provide it for record?
Correct.
Okay. Item E was the insurance that I mentioned earlier.
Paul, if you got anything while we're going through this, make sure, I mean, then your changes that.
Yeah, I've got one on the next page.
Item G, this is getting into an OSHA item, and my OSHA is really, really ugly. We're asking them, I believe in a later section, to actually provide, a distribution to the township hall. Under my OSHA regulations, we don't want anything to do with that book, guys. If that book is ever used and it's not been updated with current MSDS or anything else we could get assigned to fine, this is watched so significantly that I actually rent for a cup of coffee a shelf in a job site trailer for someone else's MSDS books. This is a, if we wanna have it for record or proof that they've got it, they have to keep it on site, but I don't know that I want it to ever come to the township.
Are you talking about the safety manual? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You don't take on any liability by just having it here.
I can send you my OSHA fines that would indicate it.
Not just by holding on.
That was one of those things we don't, for particular models, we have no idea from one model to the next, exactly what their evacuation distances.
That's different from the MSDS sheets, though, that was my point. If the MSDS sheets, if they change manufacturers, they go buy a Johnson & Johnson instead of a Windex, those things get out of date, so,
You're right that they can get out of date, but the reason it's there, and there's a legitimate purpose, is so that the fire department knows what is on these sites if and when they ever have to address fire issues. Now, updating it is a separate issue, but it's clearly enforceable and legitimate requirement to have that provided upfront, so you know what they plan to have there.
okay. Indemnity provision, please. As long as we've got indemnity on the facts.
One that I wanted to point out is in paragraph on transportation plan. At the last meeting, we talked about, as part of the approval process, the township being able to establish the routes that would be used to bring trucks to and from the site. So that second sentence has been added. Township Planning Commission, in cooperation with the Road Commission, shall determine the acceptable routes.
I don't think MDOT will give us, because MDOT will have jurisdiction on 66, 522, there's other ones that are out there. They're also gonna look at highway bridges and other items that are there.
We understand. The
And
township can say no to, and the road commission can say no to, non-state highways.
I understand, but let me finish. On the past projects that I looked at in Michigan, the transportation plan is not completed typically until 7 to 9 months after they would be heard by us.
Well, this would be part of the special use approval. They have to show what their routes will be to get to and from the site with their equipment.
So they can show us that plan, but others are gonna change it in that 9-month window after we hear it. So do we have, this special use permit, is it conditioned? Are we able to list contingencies? Are we able to say they're gonna work out, cause they're gonna, let's say we hear it in March, and in September, there's major bridge work that's being done or something else, right? It's gonna change it to that point. I think until the plan's approved, when I looked at Gratiot and Isabella, until that route was approved, that's when they had to start doing their engineering drawings, they had to get those items done. They found a lot of areas where the frontage dedication was not done. They had to get all the driveway access permits, had to be secure, and they did not do any of that prior to the applications. So I'm trying to understand, is this an item that we can see preliminary what it is? And if the special use is conditioned on us having a sign off for this, because it does happen post-hearing.
The answer is yes. One of the main purposes of regulating something as a special land use is that you can impose unique conditions to deal with a specific effects of a particular type of unique project. You probably, if and when this project ever comes to fruition, you probably have a 40-page permit that you'll be issued from the planning commission. And yes, you can have that type of condition that they, give preliminary approval to the route, and if there's any change, they've got to come back and get an amendment.
Okay. So that answers my question, that it is a special use conditional. Okay, Paul, I'm not talking no more for a while, so you can speak.
Moving on to paragraph 6, commercial wind energy system standards and requirements.
Can I go to the one before? I'm sorry. Planning commission question, just before 6, the last item of 5. I wanted to flag that this says, any revisions to the site plan must provide revised calculations to address all items required on the original setbacks. But do we want the zoning administrator to sign off? Are you gonna require it to come back to the planning commission to receive any sign-offs? I don't know that our statute specifies it, unless I misread it. but I wanna make sure that we're very clear on who would look at it, and do we need to have any provisions for what minor deviations may be compared to major? Are you hating that?
There's a fairly comprehensive list of what's considered a minor amendment that the zoning administrator could address. It's like shape of lighting, landscape materials, parking lots, decrease in building size, moving a building no more than 10 feet, increase in building size, it's not more than 5,000 feet. So,
But shadow flicker and noise, and none of those are in there, so
No,
then
so they'll
automatically
come back
send
to
it
the
back to the
planning
planning commission?
yeah.
So because it's not captured in 13, should we just state that it's the planning commission?
Well, they may have changes that aren't those type of things.
Okay,
I mean, they may very well, wanna move it, the driveway 2 feet, because their survey was off on where the property line was. And that's, not the kind of thing you want coming back to you to talk about, driveway that's been moved 2 feet.
is everybody fine with that? A tower gets moved 10 feet, we're okay with the zoning official
Well,
signing off on that?
That's gonna change shadow flicker there. The example I gave you was a driveway that moves 2 feet because of property.
I'm asking, it said 10 feet in there, so I'm asking, does that mean if the tower moves 10 feet? If a substation moves 10 feet?
If the tower was to move 10 feet, the whole site plan would have to be revised, wouldn't it?
That's what this is saying, is if you move a tower, then you've gotta do the calculations and show the shadow flicker and impact.
But chapter 13 gives a 10-foot allowance to
Or-
the zoning
or-
official,
Or a building.
or a building.
Not
So the substation,
the substation could move 10 feet.
a shack can move 10 feet. I'm
You still
asking.
gotta comply with all applicable setbacks of the zoning, so if it does, what are you gonna say about it, anything, you can't say no to that.
I'm just asking the question, I'm not laying on a sword, I'm just, recommendation, Paul and Ron?
I see no reason to change it. The ordinance covers it. We define minor changes.
Okay. Then the setbacks are the other ones I think we wanted to
6A
talk about.
setbacks.
Yeah.
Again, when this was proposed for 4 times the tip height, the height of the tower was limited to 150 feet, so that was 600 feet. But if you increase the height of the tower, as I'm recommending, 4 times the tip height, could become unreasonable, and again, make many of these areas unusable for that purpose. Again, as we said before, the setback is the minimum, but they've still gotta comply with noise requirements, shadow flicker requirements, and all the rest. So regardless of what the setback says, they may have to do more to comply with all of the other regulations.
So do we need to address,
More is their problem though.
Well, it
We
is.
We have to have something there that puts them out so far, and then if they can't do it, they have to move further.
Exactly.
That's their problem.
But 4 times, again, may not be reasonable, given the areas available to
Yeah.
even accommodate
I
these.
think what you're saying, if we pick 500 feet, not 6 that they're going now, or some other, let's say it's 5, we're definitely not gonna wanna give them 4 times, right? We're gonna wanna give them something less. So do we need to discuss height first, to get that nailed down,
Well,
and then back into the rest
I
of
think-
these?
The height, frankly, from what I've reviewed, is gonna be somewhere between 400 and 500 feet. I mean, 4 right now seems to be the average for winter tip height. 5 is becoming more common, 6 is not terribly uncommon. And looking historically over how heights have changed from when wind turbines first came on the scene, you can see a steady increase in the height of these things, so.
I think it has to do with, megawatts. I think the four
The
fifty is
wattage,
like
the wind
2.6 versus
speeds.
3. I think it's 2.6 versus 3.2 is where you saw them go to the 580 mark. Because when they went to 580, they got to reduce the number of them by a third. So it's kind of like, if you get the height, you get less towers. If you have
As I
shorter
look
height,
at the ordinances that, again, the community and the planning commission looked at, 1.5 to 2 times tip height is pretty much what's been used across the board.
Not in our area. You know, you should take the daily news at least and read something once in a while.
I don't get all my technical information from the news. But this is the sheet that.
Make sure he knows that, the reporter there.
So I saw that same one, and then I also pulled a bunch of other ones as well. But I think we need to have the height discussion, because it triggers into all these other items.
So you wanna talk about the height first before we do the
I think you have to, because none of the other math works anywhere.
so then we're gonna move to B then, correct? 6B. Tip height. What's your pleasure?
$500. I feel like I meant, wasn't somebody here in Vegas or something? Oh, you went to it. 500.
So you said the most common are between 400 and 500 right now. So how current is that technology? Is that something that in another year and a half is gonna become exclusionary because that's so outdated? I mean, is that gonna give us enough of a?
400 seems to be, the prevalent height now of towers that were built a few years ago. 5 is sort of the newer technology. 6 is the next step beyond that. I think my recommendation would be 500. And I think that's reasonable, and it's not something that, 5 years from now, if they come and say, well, 700 is the new norm, you say tough. We've established a height, and we think you can live with it.
All I know is Biden said 1,000-foot vertical blades on the news the other day, and I certainly don't want that. So, and I know that.
We went down through before, and we said what each of our preference was. Now, we didn't come to a consensus, but, and I only got one vote, but I think you're way taller than our area can withstand. You don't want this, you know how you said, make sure that they don't repeal this, okay? You are walking into an area where it's gonna be repealed, you're talking 500 foot.
So I would.
Referendum, whatever.
I would argue that 500 feet is gonna prevent them from doing the 3.2 towers. It's gonna limit them to the 2.6, 2.8 tower range, and it may not economically work. So I would argue the other way to you. I think there's a technology and output side on the other one. I think also the lower you have, the more they're gonna wanna put in to generate the same amount of power. So you have to find a sweet spot of one we don't want any lawsuits, we don't wanna deal with any of those issues. And you've gotta find that piece in there. I mean, it's what it is. Now, if you don't want 600, cause you don't want 3.2 systems, that's the current technology at 580 feet, and we're limiting it at less. Around the airport, they're at 450 on the new towers. So That's where I am at.
Church, you gotta take into effect our township.
I don't want our townships to,
I'm not worried about it. We've been asking about this case for insurance for months and never heard it. We've gotta have insurance. You're gonna get sued by somebody, citizens or township or somebody.
so I think we're back to the foot height.
Right.
Is there anybody that wants to make a motion on how many feet they would like to have the tip height at?
I'll make motion at 350.
There's support?
I support it.
Any other discussion?
I would probably say 500.
We got a motion on the, we got a motion on the. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, no? Wells,
Yes.
Tammy,
No,
Becky,
No.
Rick,
Yes.
motion defeated. Now we're back to the drawing board on how many feet for the tip height. Is there a motion on, anyone wanna make a motion for tip height?
Alright, so I would make a motion for 500 foot.
Is there support?
support.
Is there any discussion?
You want to make this fly, but
We'll go ahead and vote if there's no discussion. Pat? Todd?
No.
Tammy?
Yes.
Becky?
Yes.
Rick?
no.
Motion carries 500 tip height. Now, we go back to 6A setbacks. Now,
The first one's non-participating parcels.
right,
So, is that the one we just talked about, 2 times the tip height, is that the one we just talked about?
Right now it says 4 times.
But that was when it was a lower height, so,
right. 4 times would be 2,000 feet.
so I think for non-participating parcels, it should be 2.
I think we should go back to the 1320.
You wanna go back to the 1320?
That would be about 2.5, a little over 2.5 times. That,
Where it
The
was in the red
safety
line?
man,
yeah.
the safety manuals have an evacuation zone on most of them. We don't even know on a 500 footer. But the evacuation zone on the other one's 1,640 feet, okay? And so you're gonna, you can't make it less than that. We haven't seen what the new man, on the new ones, what the safety manual says on them. That was at a 350 foot, 1,640 foot.
At least have 3 times that, I mean.
So 3 times of 500 and 1,500 feet, that exceeds the old number.
Well, it's in the middle of what they had the,
Yep,
right?
yep.
I think it still has to meet the minimum with the safety manual. And we don't know what that is yet, because we haven't got the manual.
So, are you thinking 3 times for non-participating? Yeah. Or do we wanna say number of times, or do you want feet?
Well, if it's,
Trying to be
if
consistent.
it's less than 500 feet, then through the multiplier would make more sense.
Or are we really wanting them to be 1,500 lineal feet from a non-participating parcel?
At least.
So to your point, if they had a 400-foot tower and we did it at 3 times, it'd only be 1,200. So if we really want 1,500 lineal feet from non-participating person, we're better off stating the lineal feet, not times the tip height. If our maximum maximum static regardless of what it is.
What do you want? You want feet or you want?
So then she's saying 1,500 foot, right?
But he was saying multiplier.
Right.
Multiplier does the same thing as it goes 3 times.
Not unless you get.
No, if you had a 400-foot tower, then it's only gonna be 1,200 feet at 3 times.
Right now, if you state linear feet, then
Now, are you gonna take a look at, if the safety manual says 1640, you're still gonna want 1,500 feet?
The safety manual for employees,
The unredacted safety manual, whatever that is.
but is
We've
that
never
for
seen
the,
that. It's what they required, the evacuation area from their employees, whatever, yes, whoever it is.
but that's different than the exposure of a failure.
What?
You're
Tell the
mixing
other
two
person
things.
that.
What evacuation plan are you talking about? Because I've not seen an evacuation plan.
I've only seen with the shorter ones, and they were 1,640 feet. I'm just saying, if you're gonna go 1,500 foot, and then we find out that the safety manual says 1,640 feet, you can have 1,500, but you better have it so that we can change it to whatever, if it needs to be increased to the minimum of a safety manual, because
But I
none of us
believe,
know what the 500 foot is.
I believe we address the safety concerns later on in this, and if their safety plan comes back and requires greater than what we have, it's captured under the safety component.
No.
There's just a little bit of apple and orange. What he's talking about is in the event turbine catches on fire.
Uh-huh.
In the safety manual, it says practices to evacuate people within 1,600 feet, what he was talking about. What we're talking about here is just where the tower is gonna be situated for day-to-day operation, not necessarily an emergency. Now, I understand the point you're making. You want a setback that's at least equal to the evacuation zone, so essentially nobody would have to be evacuated.
Well, if you're non-participating, why should you leave your house?
I'm not criticizing, I'm trying to articulate what you're saying. You want a setback so that nobody has to be evacuated other than employees.
So could we word that as 1,500 foot or, like right now it has, or the 3 times or 4 times? Could we say 1,500 foot or the designated evacuation zone for that particular turbine? Would
Whichever
that
is
help?
greater.
Whichever is greater, would that help?
Well, keep in mind, this is a setback from the property line, not from the nearest dwelling structure.
Okay.
They really don't know how far ice throw and stuff like that, there's all kinds of, you can go on the internet and you can see them 2 miles.
Okay, so for a non-participating parcel, 1,500 foot then? Is that what we're?
Are we at 3 times or are we at 15?
it's your discussion.
I would be more comfortable with the static amount, I think, that way, if they do happen for some reason to come in with a shorter turbine that's 450 foot, we've still got the full 1,500 foot setback. It's not gonna inch.
Is that a motion?
I'll motion for 1,500 foot.
Is there support?
I'll support it.
Moved and seconded, any other discussion? Pat?
No.
Todd?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Becky?
Yes.
Rick?
No,
Motion carries. 3 to 2. 1,500 foot setback from non-participating. Hold on.
Inhabited structures. I think this was the typical 1.5 policy reference. Memory works. Next deadline is where.
Necessarily. Because you're already further away from the mountain.
Access to driveway. So they can't put it like right along the fence row back to, and back around that way?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that kinda conflicted with the desire they had in the prior one, where they
Right.
wanted the access roads to be at the boundary line, and then this one was a complete flip.
Right. Ground clearance,
You gotta change B, but that's
We've
the one we
already
already
done
talked about, so,
Yep.
so C. So that's the right man, Paul, now where you got C at 75. So the math didn't work before when it was 75, but.
I think 75 was in the original draft, so and they were actually proposing a 500 to 600 foot.
So we maxed out now at 5, so if they actually provide lower, are we going to get into a challenge?
We can check that.
It might be on that recap sheet that you already did.
No. It isn't. We'll double check that.
Okay, thank you. So, on the lighting plan, does this include facilities? It references FAA.
The number